On Christmas Day of the year 2012, 9-year-old me woke up to a brand new, shiny Nintendo 3DS XL, and alongside it came two games, NASCAR Unleashed and Steel Diver. This game sucks. It seems very few people can actually recall the game Steel Diver, and I remember enjoying it quite a bit. To this day, it remains one of the most unique and interesting games that Nintendo has ever published. And to celebrate the fact that this game is now 10 years old, I decided to make a crappy YouTube video about it, because I am bored. The first concept for Steel Diver began when Shigeru Miyamoto decided that he wanted to make a flight simulator. After making Pilot Wings on the SNES, he apparently wasn't satisfied with the simulation aspect of the game, and decided that now he actually wanted to make a submarine simulator. At E3 2004, the first tech demo of this game was revealed for the Nintendo DS under the very creative name of Submarine Tech Demo. It was at some point broadcast over download play to the masses, which, according to this guy on YouTube, led to a ROM of the original game being available online. Although, personally, I can't seem to find it anywhere. It also had a neat title theme, with the letters SOS being spelled in Morse code as a beat. It's pretty cool. Anyway, fast forward to the launch of the upcoming Nintendo 3DS, and Miyamoto finally gets the chance to fully realize his dream of making a submarine simulator. After getting some assistance from a company named Vitae, Steel Diver for the Nintendo 3DS was finally revealed at E3 2010 and was released on March 27, 2011 as a launch title for the new system. When Steel Diver originally released, it gained quite mixed reviews. People liked the unique and interesting mechanics of the gameplay, but they cited that it had pretty obtuse controls and a very high level of difficulty, which we will get into soon enough. Plus, it really didn't help that the game originally retailed for $40 US. Reviewers back then were also disappointed with the whole glasses-free 3D effect, because keep in mind this was back when the 3DS first released, and people really just wanted to see what the whole 3D part about the 3DS was about. Honestly, it's pretty weird hearing about it today. Now that we've had this thing for 10 whole years now, we don't really ever think about how the Nintendo 3DS had real 3D visuals. It's still quite impressive how they managed to pack this unheard of technology into such a tiny screen. I don't know where I'm going with this, I just really wanted a chance to talk about the 3D on the 3DS for no reason. After looking at this nice diorama on the 3DS menu, we're greeted with the title screen of the game along with the main theme. I feel like it's pretty on par with the 2004 tech demo theme, but they're both great in their own ways. So how do you even play Steel Diver? On the top screen is your game view, which shows your sub's health, the timer, and, well, the game. But the bottom screen is where things get interesting. Everything here is controlled by the touch screen. The two sliders at the bottom and right side control your movement, and if you move the sliders all the way, you hear a voice command like it's an actual submarine, which is just a really cool touch. You also have the pitch wheel, which you spin around to put your submarine at different angles, and you can reset it by holding down the center. This can be used to surface and dive quicker, or to aim your torpedoes, which you fire by tapping the torpedo buttons. You also have your masker, which is used only to throw off enemy homing torpedoes. This uses up your air meter, which you replenish by moving up to the surface. You also regenerate health while at the surface, so you might need to be doing it quite a lot. Finally, you have some useless depth and speed meters and the C chart, as the game puts it. It's just a map that you can zoom in and out of by tapping on it. It highlights your position and your main objective at the end, which helps out. And, well, that's about it. That's how you play Steel Diver. Actually, sometimes when you take damage, you spring a leak on your submarine, which you have to put out by holding on it on the touchscreen. Now, for some reason, when I was a kid, I used to think that you had to put it out by rapidly spamming it. This made the game way more difficult than it needed to be, as you can't control your submarine at all until the leak is gone. How I just figured this out while I wrote this video, I have no idea. Now, sure, the game can be a bit clunky and slow to control at times, but keep in mind you are controlling a 16,000-ton submarine. Not exactly the most agile thing in the world. Plus, this is, in my opinion, just one of the things that makes Steel Diver so unique and interesting. Controlling a naval vessel with the Nintendo 3DS stylus is just a really cool concept and makes for some fun gameplay. There are 3 different submarines that you can use to play through the missions. You have the largest one, dubbed the Serpent, which has the most HP, the most torpedo slots, and the steepest pitch. However, this comes at the cost of the worst maneuverability. You have the mid-sized sub called the Blue Shark, which is pretty much just in the middle. Then you have the smallest one, dubbed the Manatee. It has the best maneuverability, but coming at the cost of the least HP, the least torpedo tubes, and not having a pitch wheel. Instead, one of your torpedoes fires vertically, which is arguably the most useful thing in the game. But more on that later. I just love the little details that they added in here for no reason, like how the stats mention how many crew members are in each sub, or how they added little portraits of the captains which are supposed to characterize the submarines. Ah yes, everyone remembers the classic Nintendo character, Dante Cruz. When can we expect to see him in Mario Kart? Moving on, here we have the main 3 game modes: Missions, Periscope Strike, and Steel Commander. We're gonna look at the mission mode first, as it's basically the main game. So here's the story. The year is 19XX, and a power-hungry rogue nation is invading its neighboring countries, placing the stability of the entire world in danger. In order to preserve the peace, a secret submarine fleet chosen from the best and brightest of the world's navies has been formed. They are known as the Steel Divers. Honestly, this story is just kind of bland, but even then I feel like it's still very underutilized in the game itself. They could have made cutscenes explaining the missions to you, or at least reference it at all during the missions outside of a brief description of your objective. Moving on to the missions themselves. There are 7 of them in all, each ranging in difficulty. Training. It's a basic tutorial, teaches you the ropes. Easy peasy. Mission 1, Frontline Base. It's pretty much just a repeat of the tutorial with some more bad guys. Reach the enemy base, yada yada. Mission 2, Jungle Canal. This one has a fork in the road where you can choose from 2 different paths for a section of it, but it doesn't really matter which way you go. It has pretty waterfalls though. Mission 3, Undersea Cave. This one has a volcano. That is all. Mission 4, The Depths. Okay, this one is actually pretty cool. So, you navigate through the sunken ruins of an ancient civilization, and you have to topple over these giant head statues to progress. The mission also introduces a new kind of mine, which automatically explodes on a timer once you get in range. Just move out of the way or shoot it with a torpedo before it explodes. At the end of the level, you fight a giant nautilus. Wrestle with the floaty controls, scare him off, and you're done. Oh yeah, by the way, after you complete a mission, you play a mini-game called Periscope Strike. It's where you're looking through the periscope of your submarine using the 3DS gyro controls, and you shoot torpedoes at enemy ships that circle around you. Some are slow, some are fast and die in one hit, and the round is over in about 30 seconds. When you down an enemy ship, you get a decal to put on your submarine. Decals are, as you'd expect, textures that you can apply to the hull of your sub that also show up in the leaderboard next to your name. If you collect enough of any one decal, they can add different buffs to your submarine. Some are pretty crappy, like increasing the effects of water currents, and some are really powerful, like completely getting rid of the leaking mechanic. This really adds some replayability to the game and actually kinda makes you want to go back and play the missions just to unlock them. There's a Mario one. Mission 5, Preemptive Strike. This is where the game actually starts to get pretty difficult. There are mines and enemy subs and ships anywhere, and if you stay on the surface for too long, the enemy aircraft will drop bombs into the water. At the end, there is a giant enemy battleship boss fight. See, the only way to damage him is to shoot a torpedo at the doors here when they open up to drop homing torpedoes at you. Occasionally, he'll move around and shoot missiles into the air that you're supposed to dodge. This is a pretty difficult level, and there are basically 2 strategies that I'd recommend. 1. Use the large submarine and just tank all of the damage. And 2. Use the compact submarine to completely cheese the boss fight. I'm serious, the vertical torpedo on this sub completely negates the use of the other 2 submarines, as it means you don't have to struggle with aiming the pitch wheel. Without it, this boss fight is insanely more difficult. Now listen, I'm not saying that the vertical torpedo makes the small sub OP, but without it, the small sub would be basically useless because of its paper-thin HP. Actually, the fact that this mission is better for a specific type of sub is actually pretty cool, and I wish they could have explored the concept of certain submarines being more optimal for certain missions, rather than just leaving the choice up to the player's preference. In other words, I guess you could say that it adds some depth to the game. Anyways, Mission 6, the Arctic Circle. This one's pretty interesting as well. You have to navigate around a bunch of glaciers, destroy them, avoid them, and shoot them out of your way. Kill the bad guys, get hit by some mines, and you're home free. There are also some whales that appear in this level and nowhere else in the game for some reason. On to the final level, Mission 7, Enemy Stronghold. Gonna be honest, this one's pretty cool. So you navigate some tight underwater corridors of this giant industrial complex. Throughout the mission, there are loads of enemy submarines, ships, and mines, some easier to cowardly sail past than others. There's a switch that you're supposed to shoot a torpedo at, which, again, appears nowhere else in the entire game. It's all fine and dandy until you get to this one point, where you meet the final boss of the game. A giant, powerful submarine which, according to the game, will place the entire world in danger if it's completed. Once you meet it, you chase it through the last half of the level, slowly chipping away at its health as it throws mines and torpedoes at you. Once you both make it to the last area, you engage in an epic final battle for the fate of the world. Oh look, the other two submarines showed up to help you fight. How kind of them. You can't hit him from the front because he has armor on, and you'll have to constantly be dodging his attacks, whether they be torpedoes firing in every direction, a giant laser that will knock out half of your health, or a rushing attack where he quickly rams toward you. Now, at first, this boss fight seems pretty intimidating, until you realize that all you have to do is hit him from anywhere other than the front. For maximum cheese, just use the small submarine, sit at the bottom, and mindlessly spam the vertical torpedo to kill him in about 30 seconds. The allied submarines don't even really help you that much. They occasionally fire very slow torpedoes at the boss that very rarely hit. Imagine if they let you switch between the friendly subs. That would have made the boss fight so much more interesting. After killing the boss, you see the vaguely evil empire collapsing in the background, followed by the credits, featuring some really nice artwork for the game which cannot be found on the internet for whatever reason. After the last Periscope Strike mission, you sign your name and congratulations! You've unlocked the Expert missions! Nah, I'm good. The Expert missions are basically just significantly more difficult versions of the story missions with extra bad guys, mines, and indestructible blocks scattered about. Yeah, you could say that this adds a lot more content to the game, but I just really don't want to go through the Expert missions in Steel Diver. I hate to sound like a game journalist here, but this game was already long and difficult enough. Sure, the Expert missions are cool and all, plus they let you unlock the last two decals, but they're not for me. So, as a whole, the campaign offers some nice challenge with the levels, as well as some extra replayability with the decals and the expert level missions for the greasiest of gamers. Other than the campaign mode, you also have the time trial missions. Now, listen, I'm generally not really that big of a fan of time trials in video games. To me, they always feel pretty pointless, and they're usually just filler for companies to claim that their game has more content in it. However, I actually like these time trial missions. For one, they all have some really cool background music which you hear nowhere else in the game, which honestly makes me wish there was music playing in the background during the campaign missions. The time trials also take out the slow and boring part of the game that you get from the campaign missions, so I sort of feel like they're the best presentation of the game's mechanics and controls. Although the difficulty of these courses seems pretty inconsistent, as Course 6 is by far the hardest and Course 7 is one of the easiest. Well, those are the missions. Being the main point of the game, they're a bit of a mixed bag. Some missions can be very interesting, some missions very difficult, and some missions very boring. Plus, there are only like 7 campaign missions, leading to the game feeling kinda on the short side. I mean, come on, it couldn't have been that hard to bump it up to 10. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention. There's also the option of racing against the Ghost sub in all of the campaign and time trial missions. You can choose between racing against your past self or against the dev team's Ghost. This is actually a really cool feature, as the developer's Ghost is legitimately hard to beat, but once you do somehow beat the dev Ghost in a stage, you unlock the Ghost medal. There are bronze, silver, and gold ones on each stage, and the Ghosts get better and better with each medal you collect. If you want to 100% this game, you'll need to get 66 medals across all of the campaign, expert campaign, and time trial missions. That's pretty insane. So, remember back when I said that there are 3 main game modes? Well, that's sort of a lie. It's more like the missions and 2 extra little nodules hanging off of it. The first node that we'll be taking a look at is Periscope Strike. If you can recall, I said that after beating a campaign mission, you play a mini-game of Periscope Strike. This is basically that, but there's a timer instead of a time limit, and you can't earn decals from playing it. You can choose from 3 different scenarios, and that's pretty much it. Now onto the final piece of content for this game. Steel Commander. Steel Commander is a strategic turn-based board game where you control a fleet of ships across a board. You could either play by yourself with an AI or with another person using 3DS download play. Now, due to unforeseen circumstances, I don't have anyone to play this with, so I'll stick with the AI for now. Your units are the supply ships, escorts, and the submarine. Your objective is to sink the enemy's supply ships. You do this by deploying your submarine into the enemy's territory and using your sonar to look for enemy ships. But be careful because their submarine is also trying to look for your supply ships. You use your escort ships to try to look for the enemy submarine. Pink hexagons will appear in a ring around the ships, implying that the submarine could be in any one of these spaces. Use the pink spaces from your other ships to line up the exact position of the sub and attack. When you attack an enemy ship, you enter an attacking minigame, which is a different story. If your ship attacks a submarine, then you have to guess which depth to deploy depth charges at, which is 100% random. If your submarine attacks a ship, then you play a round of periscope strike, except there are 10 opponents that are shooting at you and deal massive damage, and also you only have 3 torpedoes. And if your submarine attacks the enemy submarine, then you play an underwater round of periscope strike, except for your opponent is invisible. I mean, seriously, it is ridiculously hard to even find the enemy submarine here, and even if you do miraculously spot him, he moves so fast that it's impossible to hit him with your 3 torpedoes. Also, when an enemy attacks you, you can do nothing but watch hopelessly as the near-perfect AI slaughters your units. Your convoy ships do shoot at the enemy submarine, but they never hit it. I mean, they could have at least let us take control of one of the ships, being able to dodge and maneuver ourselves instead of feeling like you're watching a train crash. And you can also win the game just by sinking your enemy's submarine, meaning that your submarine is better used to try and look for your enemy's sub because there's no real point in risking it in hostile waters, giving away its position by using its ping to locate ships. This means that the best strategy is to just sit there and wait until you see the opposing submarine so that you can throw your units at it and pray that you choose the correct depth charges. Despite my grievances, this is a pretty alright extra little game mode. I mean, it's absolutely nothing like the rest of the game, but it's surprisingly engaging once you get the hang of it, assuming that you can get over the downright infuriating mechanics. I honestly think that this actually would have been great as a standalone cheap eShop game with online multiplayer, of course assuming that they would flesh out the features and refine the overall experience. Well, there you have it. Unless you consider deleting your save data to be a feature, that's all that Steel Diver for the Nintendo 3DS has to offer. So, what do I think about it? Overall, it's a bit of an odd one. On one hand, it has extremely unique mechanics and great level design with excellent music. Actually, it's a Nintendo game, so it's pretty much assumed that it's going to have good music. But on the other hand, the entire game feels a little bit rushed. Everything from the story to the amount of extra side content, it's clear that they tried to pump this out as soon as possible for the launch of the 3DS. But that's not to say that this game completely lacks content. Completing all of the campaign missions, expert mode missions, and time trial missions with all 3 submarines can take quite a while, not to mention collecting every single decal and Dev Ghost medal, and you can't forget unlocking all 9 of the Steel Commander maps. This game is by no means short of things to complete, and many people who love this game feel like its reviews did not do it justice in this department. But as I mentioned before, the gameplay itself can be frustrating, ranging from painfully boring to insanely difficult. A lot of this stems from the controls of the game. Now, they can be clunky and difficult to control once you're in an intense fast-paced situation, but like I said, I feel like the controls are part of what makes Steel Diver as interesting as it is. Not to say good, mind you, they're still clunky as hell, but that's kind of part and parcel of being a submarine simulator. There's a PC game called Cold Waters that's about submarine warfare. I've never played it, but it looks really cool, and it focuses much more on stealth and eliminating targets rather than the actual movement. Now, I'm not saying that Steel Diver for the 3DS should have been just like Cold Waters, as it's extremely complex and slow-paced, but I feel like taking this more realistic approach to the gameplay would have made a much better fit for a submarine game. I mean, if you think about it, the whole point of submarines in the real world is to be underwater so that you aren't seen, and Steel Diver does not focus at all on the stealth aspect of submarine warfare, meaning that you're forced to play with this very movement and combat-based gameplay while keeping the slow and obtuse behavior of real-life submarines. it just doesn't work that well. In conclusion, Steel Diver for the 3DS is a cool game, but suffers from somewhat poorly thought out gameplay and a lack of thorough development. Now, as I said, Steel Diver originally retailed for a whopping $40 at launch, which was the standard full price for 3DS games. Many people thought of this as overpriced, as they didn't want to pay that much for what many felt like was a gimmicky game meant to show consumers that the Nintendo 3DS had a touchscreen. This, combined with the very mixed reviews, meant that Steel Diver went down in gaming history as just a kinda crappy 3DS launch title and nothing more, to be forgotten into obscurity. However, many 3DS owners, including myself, still quite enjoyed this game. Just the feeling of controlling a submarine with the 3DS's bottom screen just really is that intriguing, and let's face it, submarines are just cool, okay? Like, look at this thing. Seriously. Anyway, fast forward to the year 2013, and for whatever reason, Nintendo is thinking that free-to-play games are a remotely good idea, so they announced that they were making a free-to-play game that would be based on Steel Diver. On February 13th, 2014, Nintendo held a Nintendo Direct in which Steel Diver Subwars was announced. Now, oddly enough, I don't really have any memories of Steel Diver Subwars. The most I can recall was getting the icon on my home menu from Spot Pass and then deleting it. By the way, does anyone else remember that? When Nintendo used to just put icons for free-to-play games and demos on your home screen with the Spot Pass feature? All they did was send you to the eShop to download the actual thing, so the whole idea was pretty pointless. After a disappointing logo instead of a full diorama on the home screen, you're greeted with the main theme of the game. In my opinion, it's okay, but definitely not as good as the first game's theme, or especially the 2004 tech demo. To me, it just sounds like a pretty generic military brass band march. Actually, most of the music in Subwars is directly reused from the first Steel Diver, and the few new tracks that are here are just okay. Alright, the first thing that you see in the title screen is a button telling you to buy the full version of the game. I will talk about this later. Moving on to the main menu, you have your multiplayer, your single player, your controls, your training, and your options. We'll look at the training mode first. So right off the bat, there are some pretty major gameplay differences between this and the original Steel Diver. First of all, the game is no longer in a 2D side-scrolling view and is now in a fully 3D environment with the first-person view from the perspective of your submarine's sail, which is what it's called, by the way. I looked it up. Another change is that the game is now completely controllable with the 3DS's buttons. You can still use the stylus with the sliders on the bottom screen, but with the game now being in 3D, it's much more fast-paced, so the touchscreen controls feel a tad awkward and slow compared to using the buttons. They also added a Morse code feature where you select this button in the top left corner of the touchscreen and use the Y button to transmit messages in Morse code. It comes in useful pretty rarely though, but I'll touch more on this later. All of these are, in my opinion, pretty good additions to the gameplay as they open up a lot of possibilities, with the 2D action of the first Steel Diver feeling simple in comparison. Being able to control your submarine with the actual physical buttons also helps solidify the game as an actual game, rather than a 40-minute tech demo of the system's stylus. Instead of there being 3 types of submarines that are completely different, there are now tons of unlockable submarines that are slightly different. They vary in stats like speed and health, but none of them really have anything cool like the vertical torpedo of the Manatee in the first Steel Diver. However, only 2 of the submarines are unlockable without the premium version, and most of the premium ones are objectively better than the peasant ones. More on this later. Now, if you remember back in the first Steel Diver, I mentioned how the menu lists useless things like how many crew members are in each vessel. Well, in this game, crew members are an actual feature and they affect your stats in positive ways. You find crew members when playing the game. They show up as purple dots on your radar in a mission or in multiplayer. If you go pick them up, you unlock them, but only a few of them are unlockable without the premium version. They're essentially just a replacement for the decals in the first Steel Diver, except now you can have multiple of them on your submarine, stacking their stat buffs. However, the submarines, of course, have a limit to the amount of crew members that you can have on board at once, with all of the premium submarines having way more slots than the free ones. Are you noticing a pattern here? The missions mode in Steel Diver Subwars kind of sucks. In the first mission, you swim around through some rings and you win. The second one, you go around, shoot some bad guys, and then win. And those are all of the missions. Unless you pay for the premium version. You can just look them up on YouTube. There seems to be 7 total missions again, but instead of trying to complete every mission with each submarine like in the first Steel Diver, you complete every mission on a different difficulty level. They all seem to be very bland, with there being absolutely no story to the single player, unlike the first game. Most of them just look like more shoot the bad guys and win, with one extra mechanic being exclusive to one of the stages where you shoot a switch. There's one of them where you use the Morse code feature to type messages that send bombers to sink enemy ships. Think Typing of the Dead, but you're constantly scouring a menu on a different screen to find which specific method of pressing one button types the letter J. Like I said, there is zero story to this game outside of the mission details being this guy saying things like, "We found an enemy PT cruiser. Sail in and destroy it or all is lost." This makes the missions feel kinda arcadey and pointless, and really detracts from the game's personality in my opinion. In conclusion, the missions of Steel Diver Subwars are boring and stupid and crappy, and I don't want to talk about them anymore. Well, since that sucked, here's hoping that the multiplayer can salvage this game. Steel Diver Subwars overall seems like it is much more focused toward the online multiplayer aspect, which kind of explains the lackluster single player. Kind of. So here's how it works. You choose to queue for either worldwide, regional, or friend multiplayer, choose between skill-based matching or random matching, and then wait to join a lobby. Yes, people still play this game for some reason. You're on either the blue team or the red team. Your objective is to sink the enemy team. That is it. There are CPUs on each team that just sit there and fire torpedoes mindlessly, as well as supply ships that you can sink for extra XP, but other than random health and ammo packs, there you have it, folks. There are 12 different maps. One of them has a button that you can shoot that gives you a coin that replenishes health and ammo, and that is the only noteworthy thing that I have to say about the maps. Now, I get that this is a small free-to-play game, but I wouldn't be lying if I said that it still feels a bit lacking. I mean, they could have at least tried to add one more game mode other than shoot the bad guys. But no, that's all you get. You can use the Morse code feature to communicate with your teammates, which comes in useful exclusively to say the word hi in the lobby when waiting for the match to start. I did see my teammates use it to say which sector of the map the enemies are in, which I guess is cool, but since it takes so long to use, and also because it's more difficult to control your submarine while using Morse code, I personally didn't use it that often when actually in combat. Enough rambling, how's the actual online multiplayer experience? Well, unless you queue specifically for worldwide random skill-based matching, you had better get ready to wait a long time for a lobby. And even when you use the widest search parameters, it's pretty much dependent on the time of day for when you can be queued for the last 12 people who still play this. I assume it was much better back when the game was released, but in 2021, it's pretty barren in here. On to the actual gameplay. After getting my ass handed to me by level 1 million Japanese dudes as standard with every online Nintendo game, I found that there are a few strategies that come in useful here. Mainly, the most effective way to dodge incoming torpedoes is to change your depth. This also makes your movement harder to predict for the attacker. Pressing the radar button to use your sonar ping may seem like a good idea, but it also makes you show up on the enemy's radar. Using the masker button makes you completely invisible for a few seconds, allowing you to make quick getaways or to sneak up on people. Hitting enemies with torpedoes from longer ranges deals more damage while also keeping you away from danger. All of these require varying levels of skill, and becoming competent at this game does actually take some time and effort. Therefore, my favorite strategy is to go down to the very bottom of the map and hide until the enemies either kill me or leave. One of the biggest gripes I have with the multiplayer is that it can be confusing to tell which team you are on. The thing with color-based teams in video games is that it should be obvious which team you are on. Whether it be the colors of your character or your teammates that are all around you, it should be drilled in pretty quickly which color is good and which color is bad. But the problem with Steel Diver Subwars is that the only way to tell which team you're on in gameplay are these faint banners at the top of your screen, which eventually your brain ignores because it's just part of the HUD. Too many times I spawned into a match, saw a bunch of guys around me, got mad because I thought that they were team killing me, only to realize moments later that they were enemies. All in all, the multiplayer in Steel Diver Subwars is fine. Sure, it can be confusing and feel slow at times and there isn't much variety, but what can you expect from a free 3DS game? Or should I say, a $10 3DS game? You've been waiting for it this entire time, so here it is. Steel Diver Subwars is a free-to-play game. Free-to-play meaning that you can play it for free, but the game offers incentives for you to spend money on assorted extra crap. But in this case, it really feels like blatant pay-to-win. The submarines you get in the base version are pretty bad in comparison to the ones you unlock if you have the premium version, as most of them have objectively better stats. This is not at all helped by the crew member system, with every premium submarine having more crew slots than the free ones, on top of the fact that only a few crew members can be unlocked without paying. It can't get much more blatant than this, folks. Now sure, the premium version does include the mission levels, and I guess that's a valid enough reason to charge money as sort of a DLC, but it's still $10 for, what, 5 pretty mediocre missions? So the question is, will I buy the premium version? You know what? After all of the crusty things that Nintendo as a company has been doing recently, from shutting down innocent fan projects for no reason to charging $60 for a direct port of a Wii game, which originally retailed for $50, may I remind you? No. I'm not going to give Nintendo $10 for this. No. I'm not doing it. Not even Peppy Hare from Star Fox can convince me. Yeah, do you remember when I mentioned that a company called Vitae helped with the first Steel Diver? Well, the same is true with this game. The founder of Vitae also worked on the Star Fox series with Nintendo, which would probably explain the connections this game has with Star Fox, such as the Blue Marine from Star Fox 64 being a purchasable submarine. Oh yeah, did I mention that if you tap on the shop icon on the main menu, there are a number of purchasable extra submarines, most of which are modeled after actual submarines used in real life, which is pretty cool, but they all cost $1 each. And also, they all have better stats than the regular submarines, even the ones that you unlock with the premium version. So let's summarize here. You have a sequel to a launch title that wasn't very well received in the first place, make it free to play, give it a $10 premium version with blatant pay-to-win features as well as a lackluster single-player experience, and you slap on a bunch of DLC submarines that separately cost $1 that also render the premium version pointless because you can buy them without the premium version as of Update 3.0 released on August of 2014, and you also have the option to remodel a submarine for a whole $1, which adds one more crew slot to one of your submarines with a maximum of 6 per sub as of version 4.0. How did I forget to mention this? If I were to say one thing about Steel Diver Subwars, it would be that it feels like they tried to make a freemium game first and a faithful sequel to a 3DS launch title second. The gameplay changes are a step in the right direction, as the 2D slider controls in the first Steel Diver really would only work on the 3DS. Bringing in the element of a 3D space opens up more potential, but the environments end up feeling barren and empty, and I would not be lying if I said that the first-person view feels claustrophobic as hell. Also, I think that it's funny how there's a loading screen when you scroll through all of the submarines. Steel Diver Subwars has some promising elements, but ends up suffering from a lack of content in general, as well as the need from the developers to create an experiment in free-to-play games, as I doubt that Nintendo ever saw this as anything more than that, an experiment. If they really cared about making this game as a faithful sequel to Steel Diver, then it would have worked much better as just a cheap eShop game with the pay-to-play elements kept to a minimum. In other words, I guess you could say that Steel Diver Subwars feels a bit shallow. So which Steel Diver game is better? In my opinion, it's the first one. Sure, the second game has multiplayer and a bunch of new features, but the first one just has much more charm and personality. It feels like the developers genuinely wanted to make a fun experience, rather than just an excuse to shove free-to-play elements into a 3DS game. So what's next for the Steel Diver series? Well, if we were to get another fully featured Steel Diver game on the Nintendo Switch, here's what I personally would want. If you remember a while ago, I talked about another submarine game called Cold Waters. If you can't tell, I really like the look of the gameplay in Cold Waters, and I think that taking some parts of that game could make a great Steel Diver game. First of all, emphasize the stealth elements. This is the whole reason why submarines exist in real life, so making gameplay and missions that focus on stealth would be much better than this. The 2D side-scrolling gameplay of the first Steel Diver works well on the 3DS, but only on the 3DS. I don't really see how it would work on anything else, so we'll make this new game with 3D gameplay like the second Steel Diver. But unlike Steel Diver Subwars, this game would be in a third-person view, taking use of the right analog stick. This would help the game feel a lot less claustrophobic and much easier to control. Having different submarines is a pretty good idea, but I think that they should be different enough so that each of them warrants use for different playstyles. There were only 3 submarines in the first game, which was nice, but definitely made it feel limiting. And there were just way too many in the second game, with their stats being mind-numbingly similar. I think about 4 to 6 different subs would be pretty good, and they cannot be locked behind a paywall. This should go without saying, but get rid of the freemium model. It was a fun little experiment while it lasted, but you have to move on now, Nintendo. Come on, you're a video game company. You made Luigi's Mansion. I think that having an engaging single-player campaign with a fleshed-out story would work wonders for a game like this. Perhaps building off of the thrown-together plot of the first Steel Diver. Having a ton of different missions would also help make the game feel substantial. But I do think that the whole beat the stage 3 times system from the last entries is pretty unnecessary at this point, as it was mainly used to pack the games with extra playtime, and this new game would already have a boatload of missions. It's really up in the air whether or not there should be online multiplayer. If Nintendo wanted this game to have a big budget and cost $60, then there probably should be online multiplayer, but if it were to be more of a small game that would cost around $30 or so, then online multiplayer is pretty optional in my opinion, of course assuming that they have a very good campaign mode. However, if there is online multiplayer, I'd definitely like to see more variety in terms of game modes. Steel Diver Subwars was a good start, but I'd like to see more inspired map designs and, again, more game mode varieties. And if they really wanted to, they could include the Steel Commander minigame, just without the train crash part. All of this sounds cool and all, but realistically, I don't think that we'll see another Steel Diver game, at least for a very long time. Most people only saw these games as those weird little gimmicky 3DS games that no one really cared about, and I doubt that Nintendo thinks otherwise. Unfortunately, it seems like Steel Diver will remain in the pile of forgotten Nintendo IPs, only to be referenced on rare occasions in newer games. Steel Diver is referenced in Super Smash Bros. As a usable weapon that fires torpedoes, as well as a collectible trophy and a spirit in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The series also appears in Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart Tour as a vehicle body. All of these are designed after the Blue Shark submarine from the first Steel Diver, except for Mario Kart, which for some reason just looks like a generic submarine design rather than something from the actual series. So to conclude this video that is now way too long, the Steel Diver series is an interesting case. The first game didn't really have a chance as it seemingly had to rush development for the launch of a brand new console as well as being relatively overpriced for the amount of content, and the second game was created solely for the purpose of being a free-to-play game. I don't think that it's impossible that we will see another Steel Diver game in the future. I mean, Steel Diver Subwars was a test to see if free-to-play games would work for Nintendo, and supposedly it succeeded. So it is still entirely possible that Nintendo could make another Steel Diver. I just hope that they abandon the gimmicky reputation that the series has and makes a fully fleshed out video game. But until that fateful day far into the future, we can pick up our 3DSs and enjoy this weird little forgotten launch title, as well as its nasty, deformed free-to-play cousin. Thanks for watching.